Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. So today we are going to take a tour of my current class that I have in Schoology. I'm currently teaching physical earth and space science to 10th graders. And the purpose of this video is basically just to kind of give you an idea of some things that you can do to make your online or blended classroom a little bit more engaging and easier for both your students and for yourself. Now, the first thing that I see when I log into Schoology is this course dashboard. So you can see I'm really only teaching two different classes. This is my Physical Earth and Space Science class for first semester. We just wrapped up first semester a couple of days ago, so you can see that second semester is also in here. And then I'm also teaching a college and career readiness class to freshmen. So here's my first semester for them and second semester for them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys a tour of my Physical Earth and Space Science class for first semester. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that class. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the importance of having an organized class for your students. So a couple of things that you can do to make sure that your class is as organized as possible for your students is to create very clearly labeled folders. So you can see here that I have some folders or pages that are shaded. And so that means that these are not viewable from the student view. And I will go ahead and log in from a test student account later on so you guys can see exactly what the students can see. But so all these four documents and folders up here, I have unpublished from students to see because we are at the end of the semester. And so basically, I only want them to be able to see the content that is passed, since we're not going to be having any more meetings for the rest of the semester since we're on break now. My contact information, all those things. Basically, the only things that they can see are the folders from the whole semester, and then a couple of other things that I have made for them. This video on how to make audio and video submissions for their homework, and then this technology support form. So since we are at the end of the semester, all of the folders for each week are actually in this past folder. So typically what I do is I have a future folder where I can go in and make plans for future weeks and have everything in there. And then as we come up on each week, I will drag and drop and move that folder out of the future folder, and then I will click this wheel here and I will publish it, which is actually not giving me the option to publish it right now since this course is no longer viewable for students anyway, given that we are on break. So typically I would click this little wheel here and it would give me an option to publish it. So you can see I can unpublish here for previous folders. But typically that's the way this course would be set up, is there would be a past folder where students could go back and access anything from a previous week. There would be the current week's folder that they would be able to access, and then there would be the unpublished future folder to allow me to go ahead and create plans in advance and get everything ready for future weeks, and then move those folders into the home page for students to be able to access, and then I would unpublish it when it comes time for students to be able to look at those. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and drag this folder back into the future folder because I'm not quite ready to unpublish that yet for students. All right, so as I was saying, organization is probably one of the most important things that you can be doing for yourself and for your students. So you can see I have very explicit folders for each week. So this was our week of school, and that folder would have been posted here on the main page for that week. But this allows students to go back and look through anything. If they want to turn in something late or they have missing assignments, they can go through and they can look through each folder to figure out what they're missing. Once the week has passed, I do move that week's folder into the past folder, and then I will move the folder for the next week out so that students can see it, and I will unpublish it once that is ready. So having folders that show students where to go every week is very important to make sure that you are directing them properly. It does take a little bit of a good memory to kind of remember where certain things were. So if a student's like, I'm missing this assignment, you have to know exactly what week that was assigned in. But a good way to get around that is if you go into your grade book, it will have all of the assignments that you've ever assigned to students. And if you hover over each assignment in the gradebook, it tells you the due date, which kind of gives you a little bit of a hint of when it was assigned, depending on what you make your due dates for your students. So for example, I have due dates every Sunday. So I unpublish a new folder on Mondays, and all content and assignments is due on Sunday. So if I have an assignment that was due on a Sunday, I know that the folder that students need to go to is the week prior to that Sunday. So those weekly folders is the first step in creating an organized online course for your students. Another important thing to do is to make sure that you have an easy place for students to get to other important things. So you can see here, I have a folder that has all the links to our WebEx meetings, or our WebEx lessons. I have a page here for my contact information. This is a separate page that is for when we go back to in-person learning on our hybrid schedule. So if we are only online, I will leave this one published. If we are in a hybrid schedule and I have some students coming in person and some students who are working from home, I will unpublish this one and publish this one instead. So I kind of keep that in there. Just makes it easier for me to kind of switch back and forth if we move from online to in-person learning. There's also this page I made here that kind of shows students what cohort they're in. When we come back to in-person learning, my school has my students on a hybrid schedule. So we have students separated into two different groups. And this is just kind of a resource for them to be able to find out what cohort they're in so they know what days they need to be coming to school. So once you have your folder set up, the next important thing to do is to make sure that you have everything within each folder labeled very clearly. So I'm just going to click on this folder for an example. So you can see here, I also have a folder for WebEx meetings. I have a hyperdoc here, which basically serves as my directions for my students. And it also lists our objectives, and we will kind of take a look at that here in a little bit. I have a Spanish version of this hyperdoc because we have a lot of ELL students at my school. So I want to be able to be fair, treat my students equitably and make sure that all students, regardless of what language they speak, understand what we will be doing for that week. You can see here, this is a vocabulary document to help clarify some terms that some students might not understand. Then we have our warm-up, and you can see here that underneath each title, you can see how many sections I have published this resource or document to. So the WebEx folder is published to all of my students. The hyperdoc is published to all of my students, and then I have a warm-up for my first period. So I have only published that to my first period because I don't want my second, fourth, sixth, and seventh periods to be confused and accidentally access the warm-up for period 1. So an easy way to do that is you'll just come over here to the wheel and you'll click Edit. And you have an option here to make it available to everyone. So you can select a specific section that you want to push it to and just make sure that you unclick everyone else because it will automatically default to publish it to period 1 and everyone else. So if you unclick this green button, it'll ensure that only period 1 will be able to see that. And then you can see here, I have an assignment. It tells my students to complete these pages in their interactive notebook. I have an exit ticket, and then I also post the resources for my students. So I have the PowerPoint from this from the video for this week, and then I also have their homework for next week posted. And then one thing I always do for my students, especially given the unprecedented nature of online learning and remote learning this year, a lot of students don't make the WebEx meetings. So in order to make sure that they have access to see what we did, I always post a WebEx recording folder. And so I will record my WebEx meetings with each session, with each period, and I will post it in here. So those are a couple of ways to make sure that your LMS is as organized as possible for your students. So again, having individual folders for each week so that students know, hey, this is what we're doing for this week. And then having everything clearly labeled for everything within each folder is also very important, because if you just post warm up here, students might not know, a lot of students get confused, like what class am I in right now? Remote learning is very challenging in many ways. So the more explicit you can be about what you want your students to do, the easier it will be for them. So they know that this is physical earth and space science. They know that this is a period 1 warm up, and they know that it is for this date. So like they know that this is the exit ticket, and I should even really take it a step further and make sure I label that this is for physical earth and space science. This is our assignment for this week. So even I have a couple of things that I could improve on, but making sure that there are clear labels to everything will make their lives a lot easier and also save you work in the long run, as you won't have to explain to students repeatedly what they need to be focusing on for the week. Another thing that is really important to make sure that you're doing with your students is to make sure that you make yourself available to your students, especially in remote learning, because students might feel a little bit isolated when they are at home, and the only contact that they get with other students and with the teacher is through a virtual meeting. So it's very important to create a presence in the online environment and to make sure that students know how to get a hold of you if they need it. And so that's why I have this page here that has my contact information right at the top. So if my students were to click on this, they have my phone number, my email address, and my WebEx room right here. It's very easy to find. It's one of the first things they see on the pages, to make sure that they have the ability to contact me whenever they like. So that was my contact information for when we are online. When we're in a hybrid schedule and I have students who are online only. So at my school, students have the option to remain online or to come in for the hybrid schedule. I will have meetings specially just for my online students since I don't get to see them in person. So I have set aside time to make sure that they have the option to have a little bit more face-to-face time with me. So my phone number, email, and WebEx room are still posted up here, but I also have this optional WebEx time for students to come in and ask me questions on anything that they may need help on. Mondays are our asynchronous day. So Mondays are mostly PD and PLC days for the teachers, and students are expected to work asynchronously, which is kind of a scheduled day for themselves. They kind of can do what they need to do for each of their classes on that day. So there's no set schedule for the students. So I make sure I carve out time for myself to be able to meet with my online only students on that day, just so that they have another opportunity to reach out to me. The other thing that's really important is to make sure that you are staying up to date with your messaging to students. So students, a lot of the time will either email you, but students who don't know how to access their email will use Schoology to message you, which makes sense because it's kind of an all-in-one platform. So if you have a message, a little circle with a number will pop up just like this notification is here. And I make sure I check it every day to see if I have any new messages from students. I can see all of my messages from my students, and then I can create a new message if I need to reach out to a student who I know doesn't access their email. So those are just a couple of ways you can increase your presence in the online environment to make your students feel like you're available and that they can reach out to you when they need something. Another thing that's crucial in both a blended learning environment and a remote learning environment is your level of communication with your students. So this goes beyond just giving your contact information and answering messages. This is where you do things such as making announcements, as you can see up here. Um, I make announcements to my students every week to post the schedule to them, making sure they know when we're meeting. And then I add any other important information to that post, just so then that way they can have all the information possible that they could need in order to be successful each week. So the way that you would post a class update, such as the one that you see on the top of my page here, you'll come over here to this left-hand menu and you will click this updates page. So typically what I will do is I'll usually just copy and paste the schedule from the previous week and I will paste it into here. And I usually always have my WebEx link as well here. I did end up actually removing it from this announcement later on in the week since we were only meeting once this week. It was finals week, so we only had one WebEx meeting. So I didn't want my students to get confused and think that we were meeting on Thursday and Friday. So in order to kind of help guide them toward knowing that we wouldn't have a meeting that week, I did remove their ability to get into the WebEx room by just removing the link. So there's two ways that you can communicate with your students. You can either make just a regular class update and just inform your students of what's going on, or you can make it an announcement. It says up here, this is an announcement. It stays at the top of the page until I decide to remove it or until I decide to replace it with a new announcement. And the way that you do that is you'll click this little comment bubble down here and you'll click this bell, and the bell indicates that this is going to be an announcement that will remain on the top of the page. And that's typically what I do if I'm going to make an announcement. Or if I'm going to make an update to my class, I will make it an announcement so that my students can see it every time that they log in. Because if I choose not to make it an announcement, the only thing that it does is it will post it only on this updates page. So your students have to know to come to the updates page and look at the updates on a regular basis because it will only post it here. It won't post it on the top of the page here. It does post it on their Schoology homepage if they come to recent activity. But so you can see here, every announcement that I've ever made to my students is on this recent activity page. But unfortunately, from my experience, a lot of my students are not checking that recent activity page. So if I have something important that I want to communicate to my students, I do make it an announcement that stays on the top of my my page here. So when you make those updates, like I said, you can communicate to them when you're meeting. And let me see if I can find an old update for you guys just to kind of give you some information, so a better idea of what you can use this for. So you can use it, like I said, for meetings. I post my WebEx link in here. I give them important information. So I told my students, I'm not accepting late work. The due date for late work was the 11th. I told them your responsibility for this week is to get your final done. I stated when that final is due, and then I also let them know that we're only meeting once that week. The other thing you can use the updates for is to post homework. So you can see this is kind of like a typical updated post, an announcement that I will put in there. So it says, period 1 meets on these days at this time, period 2, 4, 6, and 7, and then I have my WebEx link down here. If I go back even further, so let me go back to, so you see even here, I made an announcement to my students, make sure that you're submitting your assignments. I had some students who were completing their work but weren't actually hitting the submit button within Schoology. So I needed to make sure that my students knew that they need to hit the submit button, otherwise I won't know who turned it in. And here's another good example. So this is before we went on Thanksgiving break. I told them what their homework was before they come to the virtual live lesson. They needed to watch the video on page 17 in their notebooks, and then I posted the schedule with my WebEx link. So that is one of the easiest ways to communicate to your students, is just to make sure that when you do an update, you make it an announcement so that it pops up there at the top of the screen like this. Just as a note, if you are posting an announcement to multiple periods and you decide you want to remove it and not have an announcement up there at all, you will have to click the remove button for the same number of times that you have for each section. So I will have to click this remove button times in order to make sure it's removed from every period. All right. So I'm going to come back to my materials page here. And on the topic of communication, you want to make sure that your students know when you have those live lessons. So there's a couple ways to make sure that students know that. One way is through those announcements like I was talking about that you can post in the update section of Schoology. Another way is to make sure you have a folder for the links to your live lessons. So if I click on this folder for my WebEx sessions, you can see here that I have the posted for each period. And this actually, I edited it for the last week of school because I was only meeting with my students on Tuesday and Wednesday, and I did not meet with them on Thursday or Friday. So you can see here that normally this would say PES period 1 WebEx live lesson Tuesday and Thursday at 7:45 a.m. And I just went ahead and edited that so that they would kind of know, hey, we're only meeting once this week since we're taking the final. And then I also have kind of I guess a template for if I'm ever not meeting with a certain period. Like let's say I'm taking a personal day. So if I had an appointment on this day, so I went ahead and published this to my 7th period only, and I unpublished the link to their WebEx meeting, and I published this instead. So what this says is you can kind of just edit it saying, we're not meeting on this day, and your reason for that, if you so choose to explain to them why you're not meeting. But you can see here, if I come to this WebEx link for period 1, it just says click the link to join, and it has the link to my WebEx. So it's just very straightforward, very clear, so students don't get confused. So those are 2 ways that you can let your students know about when you're meeting, is the announcement on the top of your page, and then also in the folder that you'll have on your homepage. And then a final way is to create an event. And so these events will show up on this little right-handed area over here for your students as well as for yourself. And it'll also show up on their Schoology homepage. So you can see here, there's an upcoming kind of area. So this will show the students their upcoming events for every single class that they have. So it's important that when you create an event using the event calendar here, that you're very explicit on when they're meeting and who they're meeting with. So you can see here, here's my calendar of when I had sessions for all my periods, and I always entitle it PES period 1 WebEx live lesson, and I put the day and the time in there. So then that way when it shows up in their upcoming list, they know that this is for their period 1, they know it's for their science class, and then if I click this view item, it'll just take them to this page and they can click the WebEx link to join. And it has the day, the time, and then the instructions on where to go. All right, so now let's go ahead and get into the big chunks of creating a good online or flipped classroom using your LMS. So in a year like 2020, 2021, we've all been dealing with the challenges of switching back and forth between a remote classroom and in-person classroom. And what I have found is that creating a classroom that is a flipped classroom when you're in person makes it a lot easier to go back to an online or a remote environment, because you're still delivering in a flipped classroom. You deliver your content lesson in a video form typically, and you have your students watch those videos at home, and then they come into school and they do guided practice or group projects. So when you deliver the content in a format where students can watch it at home, that gives you the ability to easily switch back and forth between in-person and remote learning, because you already have the same, you're going to be doing basically the same thing whether you're in person or you're online. You're going to have your students watch their videos on their own, and then you're going to have them come into class and you're going to work on things with them. So when they come into your synchronous sessions and they come into your WebEx meetings, they can be asking you questions. You guys can work on whatever assignment is associated with that lesson together. And then you can also reference or watch parts of that video to kind of refresh their memory. So having a flipped classroom when you're in a year like this, where we're constantly going back and forth, really lessens the load on you as a teacher, because you're not having to create twice the amount of content, or trying to figure out what you're doing when you're online if you have something planned for in person. So planning ahead for that and having all the resources you need to do a flipped classroom is probably one of the best things you can do for yourself to kind of make your life a little bit easier. So let me kind of give you an example of a way that I have been making sure that um, we're kind of doing similar things when we go back and forth between remote and in-person learning. So what I have done is I've created what's called a digital interactive notebook, or DINB for short. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up and give you guys kind of an example. So this notebook, I have actually on my professional website that has all the resources for enhancing your ability to deliver content in an online or blended environment. There is a video on how to make these interactive notebooks, but I'm just going to kind of show you how I use this to um, flip back and forth between in-person learning with a flipped classroom and online remote learning. So what I do for my students is I create this notebook, and you can see here there's a table of contents that tells you what each page is. You can actually click on some of these sections here, and it'll take you to that slide so they can see, okay, I know I needed to do page 8, or whatever it might be. There's also a page here on the different icons that indicate what you need to be doing. So there's this home button in each corner that will take you back to the table of contents to tell you, so you can figure out what page you need to be on. This pencil icon indicates that you need to be answering a question. The highlighter indicates you need to be annotating text. There's an Edpuzzle icon that you'll have to click if I assign an Edpuzzle video. There are flashcards that I use. I connect it to my Quizlet, and I give students, an extra way to practice. And then there's these Bitmoji eyes that kind of say, hey, there's something on the side of the slide over here that I need you to pay attention to. So you can see here on this first page of content, I have my video lesson. So this is a video that I created using the PowerPoint, and I assigned this to my students as homework. So they were supposed to watch this video, and then we worked through the 2 subsequent pages after this. So this is still something I could do when we're in person. I could tell my students the week prior, I need you to watch the video on page 4. When we come into class next week, we'll be working through pages 5 and 6 together. So these interactive notebooks are really nice because it allows students to engage with the content, and do a little bit of guided practice. And you can do a lot more than just multiple choice questions or short responses. I have a lot of drag and drop matching, some fun activities, a lot of different resources for my students in these notebooks. I have found that a lot of students are pretty engaged and pretty satisfied with the way this content is delivered here. So you can see again, there's my Bitmoji icon that shows, hey, there's some things here on the side that you need to use to complete this page. And then there's the pencil icon that explains to them what they need to be doing, or that says like, hey, you need to complete some work on this page. And so this is mostly like a table where you can fill in all these answers. So that is kind of one way that you can deliver content in both when you're switching back and forth between remote and in-person learning, is to flip your classroom. So regardless of whether my students are coming in and seeing me in person, or if they see me in a WebEx session, I can tell them that they need to watch this video, and then we will work on the guided practice in the other pages. I know we talked a lot about organization and making sure that everything was organized so your students could find it very easily. Along that same train of thought is making sure that you have very explicit instructions for your students, so they know exactly what they need to be doing each week. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to hop into, let's see, I think I want this week. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go to this folder. And you can see here, like, when you come into this folder, it might look kind of confusing and you're not quite sure what you need to be doing. So what I have done for all my students is I create what's called a hyperdoc. And these hyperdocs are basically the instructions for that week. And it also is a good way to make your objectives very clear to your students. So I create one of these for each week that we're doing. And you can see here, I talk about what unit we're in, what topic we're on. I give them kind of a brief summary of what we'll be talking about, and then I tell them that they need to be completing everything in this hyperdoc by the deadline. And then there's an important note here that says some assignments have earlier due dates. So make sure you pay attention to those. So each week when I meet with them in WebEx, or if we're in person, I will go over the objectives that are listed in each week's hyperdoc, and I will read the standards out loud to them so that they know this is what our goals are for the week. This is how it relates to what we should be knowing for the state standards. And then I have the directions basically for each task that they need to be doing. So the first task is we're going to practice and explore. So we're going to be working on our interactive notebook. Because this is a single document that they needed to continue adding to, they have to go back to a specific week to access it, because otherwise Google doesn't allow you to link the same document that students have worked on in a new assignment. So in order to do that, to make sure that they're adding to the same document and it's saving their work from previous weeks, I had to instruct them to go to this week, which is the original file that they opened up and started working on. So this week they were supposed to complete pages 12 through 14 in the notebook, and the due date for those pages is November 8th. Then after they do the pages in their notebook, they were supposed to be doing a virtual lab. It says here, like anything that's important, I highlight, I bold, I capitalize, I'll change the text, just so that I want them to pay attention to this part of the instructions that I'm showing them here. So it says, start by going into the assignment in Schoology and carefully reading all directions. So even though this gives them a little bit of guidance of what they need to be doing step by step each week, and it kind of chunks out what we're doing, I still give instructions within each assignment to make sure that, there's multiple places that they can be going to make sure that they're getting all their work done and that they know how to do the work properly. And then I say you need to do your exit ticket here. And then you can here I have a WebEx meeting for my online students, because this is actually while we were in person. So if we weren't in person, and let me show you kind of an example of what the hyperdoc looks like for a remote week. So you can see this week we did a virtual field trip. And again, I have my unit, topic, some brief instructions on what we're doing, a brief summary. the objective and the standard that it relates to, and then I have my live lesson here. And so the other nice thing about the hyperdocs is you can put links to it here, or you can just give them instructions on where they should be going in order to complete each part of the instructions and assignments for that week. So because this was a remote week, I have met with all of my students remotely, and I have the schedule posted here. So that's a fourth place that I have the lessons posted, just to make sure that, hey, you know when we're meeting and you know how to get there, because I have posted it in 4 different places. And so then they can click this link here in order to get to my WebEx room. We just did a social contract discussion. So I showed them how to get to it here, and then I kind of summarized what they needed to do for that. We did a virtual field trip, so I posted the video within Schoology. I posted it in my HyperDoc, and then we watched it together in the live lesson. This link is more for students who don't come to the synchronous sessions so that they can watch it as well. And then we just did an exit ticket. So HyperDocs are a great way to deliver your instructions and kind of step by step show them what they need to be doing each week. And these work regardless of whether you're remote or in person. And the other nice thing is when you create these HyperDocs in using Word, there is an option to translate them to any different language. So I also have a copy of all these HyperDocs in Spanish so that my ELL students are able to see also what we're doing for that week. All right, another thing that is going to be helpful for you in creating a classroom where students are really engaged is to make sure that you have various ways of delivering your content and just kind of mixing it up so that students don't get kind of bored with doing the same thing over and over each week. That can become a little monotonous. And, if students are continuing to do the same thing every week, they might not necessarily want to do it because it's just kind of mundane. So, although my interactive notebook is the core of my assignments, and I have, basically every topic that we learned about in the unit on history of the Earth. So you can see here I have plate tectonics, continental drift, Pangea, all those important topics were taught and they kind of recorded their learning in their notebooks. I had to make sure that I supplemented that learning with other activities. So you can see here in the week of November 2nd through 6th, I had students do a virtual lab. So this lab was actually recommended to me by one of my colleagues. And it kind of allowed students to kind of have a different form of practice. So that kind of helped them do a little bit more hands-on learning as opposed to just watching videos and doing the work in the interactive notebook. So you can see here, there are quite explicit instructions for this virtual lab because it was kind of confusing for some students. And so I had to make sure that the students who either were online and not coming to synchronous sessions, I had to make sure that they had something that would serve as a good resource for them to be able to understand and do this themselves. So what I actually did is I took screenshots of the lab itself, and then I went in and I edited it in Word, and I put in shapes and arrows and I drew circles around things, and I just did step by step showing them that, hey, you need to do this first and then do this. So one of the easiest ways to actually do screenshots like this, and let me go ahead and I'm going to open up the lab here at the bottom. So if you are on a PC, you can hold down the Windows button. So it's Windows Shift S, and that kind of pops up this screen that allows you to kind of box out the screenshot that you want to take. So if I wanted to just do that page, I could do that. And you can see it says it's saved here to my clipboard. And then I can go ahead and copy and paste that image that I just took into a Word document. I can press Control V to paste it, and then I can edit it in here. You know, I can go ahead and um, I can insert a shape. I can put an arrow in there. You know, like let's say I like this arrow, I can put that arrow in there. I can insert a text box so that I can put text in there. And then once everything's all laid out the way I want it to be, I'll go ahead and press Windows Shift S again and take a bigger screenshot of the whole page. So then it has all the text. And then when I do my instructions in Schoology, I can just copy and paste each individual picture. I usually save it to a folder or something. And as I write out the text, I can be like, okay, I know I'm going to break here for this first picture, so on and so forth. So that's kind of a mix between creating good directions as well as making sure you're creating content that engages students in a variety of ways. So we had this virtual lab that we did one week. Another thing that I liked to do that I did for my students when we came back from Thanksgiving break, since we basically had wrapped up the unit, we went on a virtual field trip. Basically, I made a virtual field trip through the use of Google Earth, and I recorded that. And my students and we went to a bunch of different places around the world using Google Earth, and it was a really fun project. If you're interested in learning more about that, there are some resources on my professional website that kind of show you how to make a virtual field trip using Google Earth. You can add pictures, you can add background music, you can, map it out. And basically we went to a bunch of different places that were made by certain types of tectonic plate movements and certain types of different weathering and erosion and constructive and destructive forces. So it was kind of a fun way to kind of tie up everything that we had learned. Another fun thing that students really like to do is they like to play games. I bet we all understand that that's kind of the age that these students are living in. It's kind of a gamified world. So the more opportunities you can have to create an assignment that reflects something that they're interested in, like games, the more engaged your students will be. So the week before finals, I went ahead and I made a Kahoot for the entire unit. And I went ahead and posted it here. We played it during our synchronous session, and then I posted it here for students to play it again if they wanted to. So you can go ahead, assign this to your students, and have them um, kind of play it. This Kahoot is closed since it's the end of semester, so you only be able to see how different students did. But that's one way to engage your students is to have them play Kahoots. Let's see. Another thing that you can be doing is using Google Forms and Google Docs to deliver warm-ups and exit tickets. So let's see. Okay, so for this week, we were learning about constructive and destructive forces, and I did a warm-up for each of my periods. And I did this through a Google form, and I'm just going to go ahead and click this button here to open it in a new window. And you can see I created this Google form, and it was just one question on seafloor spreading, and I asked my students where the youngest rocks were on Earth. The nicest thing about using Google Forms to deliver warm-ups and exit tickets is that it will analyze all the data for you. So if I look at my version of this, where I can see student answers, so this is the one I can see that has student responses, and I can see who answered it, and then I can see what percentage of students got it right and what percentage of students got it incorrect. And I can see specifically which students did not get this answer correct. So that kind of gives me a little bit of formative feedback to see who needs a little bit more support on this topic. So that's one really nice thing about using Google Forms for exit tickets, is that it allows you to be able to really kind of see who does and doesn't understand, because it analyzes that data for you immediately. You can also use Google Docs to give to deliver an exit ticket. So you can see here I created an exit ticket using Google Docs, and what that does is it creates a copy for each individual student. And it just was named these two, and it's just really easy to grade. It's really nice to be able to grade because it will create a copy of each student's answer in your Google Drive. So you can see here, I can come to, creates its own folder within your drive, and you can organize it into whatever other folder you have. And it's Schoology Google Drive assignments. So I can come here to period 1, and I can go and I can look for that exit ticket, and I can see all the students who answered it, and I can go in and individually grade theirs. I can also grade it in the actual submission portion here, and grade it there. But another option is just the gradebook open in Schoology and then open up everybody's individual answers on the document in my Google Drive. So those are two different ways that you can grade easily using Google Docs. Now, on the topic of grading, like I said, if you are using Google to create an assignment, it will create a copy for each individual student and save it to your Google Drive. So as I said, you can go ahead and open up each student's, like I can go in and I can see who did their interactive notebook here. I can open up each individual interactive notebook and then have my gradebook open here and enter in those grades as I'm grading each individual notebook. Or I can go ahead and click on the submissions portion of that assignment. So let's say I want to come into this week and I want to grade interactive notebook here. I could open up submissions while I have the notebooks open here, and grade within the submission portion as well. So those are two kind of pretty simple, straightforward ways that you have different options for grading whatever's easiest for you. All right, so now that we've gone over all the different topics that you can look at as a teacher, so we talked about organizing your LMS in a way that is easy for your students to understand, making sure that you are available to your students in an online environment and you have an online presence, having good communication with your students through the use of updates and directions, providing explicit directions through hyperdocs or within each individual assignment, making sure you have a variety of ways of content delivery to keep students engaged, and then we talked a little bit about grading. So now that I've gone through all of that, I want to go ahead and show you guys what this looks like from a student point of view. All right, so I have actually logged into a test student account. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down, and you can see a lot of teachers are actually using this this account to see what their classes look like from a student point of view, which is actually it's a best practice just to make sure that your students are able to access things the way that you expected them to be able to access them. So you can kind of see here, a lot of these reminders are from my class. So this is an assignment from my class, and it kind of shows you like this is when everything was due. And then you can see this is how the live schedule would show up. So this says live class period 1. So just as a recommendation, you might want to say English period 1 live class or something, just to make it a little bit more explicit, because if they have all these classes that just say live session, it's good that it has period 1 in there, but you can make it a little bit more explicit saying that this is for your English class or this is for your math class. So that way they know exactly which one they need to be clicking on. But I'm going to go into my class here. And so this is what my class looks like from a student point of view. So you can see my announcement is still there, but all those other folders that were unpublished, my students cannot see. So they can't see my future folder. They can't see my WebEx meetings folder since it's the end of semester. I unpublished that. So just so that there's no confusion that maybe I need to be joining WebEx meetings or something, I wanted to make sure that all they had access to was the ability to go back and look at work if they wanted to. So I can come here to the past folder, and I've been using this week a lot. So let's go ahead and go in there, and you can see this student is enrolled in period 1, so they can only see the warm-up for period 1 because I only published it to period 1. And then they can see, basically everything else. So here was the link to the live session. In my class, I have it period 1, 2, 4, 6, 7, but I only published this link for period 1 to period 1 so that they wouldn't accidentally click on the link to period 2. So that I think that's a really important thing to make sure you're doing, is just so that you only publish things for certain periods. If you have multiple sections of the same class, make sure you only publish something if it's specifically for period 1. Only let your period 1 students see that, so then that way it doesn't look too overwhelming or they don't accidentally access the wrong thing. So they can see the folder for their WebEx session. They can see the hyperdoc here, which was that document of instructions and directions with the objectives. There's a vocabulary document here. There's the warm-up. Here's our interactive notebook assignment, the exit ticket, the PowerPoint, some instructions on their homework from next week, and then the WebEx recordings. I do actually post every WebEx session because sometimes there are certain things that I might say in period 6 that I didn't say in period 2. And if I know that a student is looking for something specific, I can say, oh, I know somebody asked that question in this period. Go ahead and watch the WebEx session from period 4. That'll help you get a little bit more clarification on this if you miss the session. Another nice thing is that students can kind of just navigate by clicking the next button. So they can go from the link to the live WebEx session, then they can see the hyperdoc. So it's important to make sure when you are organizing your content, you do it in the order that you want students to access things. So then they kind of can go from one thing to the next thing in an order that makes sense, that is scaffolded for them. So I had the link to the WebEx meeting first, then I had the hyperdoc instructions so that they can see what we're doing. I have a resource here for them that would kind of help scaffold information for them before they watch the video for this week. So it just kind of defines some things for them here. Then I have their warm-up, which would be the next thing they would do, to synchronous session. If they didn't attend the synchronous session, this is still the next thing they should do before they move on to the assignment. And you can see here, the link for the actual assignment isn't in here. It says you need to go back to the original document from this week to add to it. You'll complete pages 15 and 16. In-person students will watch this video before they come to class. So my students who were online would watch the video and do the pages themselves. And then my students who were in person would watch the video, and then we would come to class and work on the actual assignment itself together. And then it has the due date here. And then the next thing on their list is to do the exit ticket, so they could click my document and they would click edit in order to access it, and they could either type it in here or they can edit it here. Once they're done, they would hit submit. And then, the last couple things in here is just I put a copy of the PowerPoint in there, and then they would click on homework for next week. So I can see here, your homework before the lesson next week is to watch the video from page 17 in your History of the Earth notebook. So that is kind of what the class looks like, a student perspective. You know, they can see all the folders here, they can see all the content, and it's only what you publish to them that they can see. If you come to updates, they can see all the updates from the class, from me, for each week that I have made one. They can see their grades. But that's kind of why I kind of went over everything from a teacher standpoint to make sure that you're communicating to them in your announcements and your updates, that you're making sure things are organized, that you're creating content that has a variety of activities and keeps them engaged. Because, you know, when students, a lot of students have a hard time staying focused and staying on track, and it's our job as instructors to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to make to help them be as successful as we possibly can. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope you learned something that is useful to you. And if you should need any other resources, please feel free to check out the rest of my professional website. Thanks so much.